Constitution of the United States is a fortress of civil liberties, yet hidden in its text is a clause that permits those very liberties to be suspended. It's short, it's obscure, but it's one of the most powerful levers a president can pull. It's called the Suspension Clause, and it allows the denial of habeas corpus, the ancient right to challenge unlawful imprisonment. It's been invoked during America's darkest hours, and not always without controversy. Habeas corpus, Latin for "you shall have the body," is older than America itself. Originating in English common law, it was a bulwark against monarchs who jailed subjects on a whim. A judge, upon receiving a habeas petition, could demand that the prisoner be brought to court and that the jailer justify the detention. It wasn't just a legal mechanism, it was a shield against tyranny. The Founding Fathers enshrined habeas corpus in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, but with one vital exception. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Notice something important. The clause is in Article 1, the section that outlines congressional powers, not the president. Yet the first time habeas corpus was suspended, it wasn't Congress who acted. It was President Abraham Lincoln. The year was 1861. The Civil War had just erupted, and Confederate sympathizers were sabotaging Union railroads and threatening Washington, D.C. Lincoln needed swift action, not legislative debate. He authorized General Winfield Scott to suspend the writ along critical military lines from Philadelphia to Washington. The order wasn't symbolic. Dozens of Marylanders, including legislators and even the mayor of Baltimore, were arrested without trial. One of those detained was John Merryman, a state militia officer accused of destroying railroad bridges. Merryman's lawyers petitioned for habeas corpus. Chief Justice Roger Taney, riding circuit in Baltimore, ruled that only Congress, not the president, could suspend the writ. Lincoln ignored the ruling. Lincoln defended his actions in a special message to Congress in July 1861. "Are all the laws but one to go unexecuted?" he asked, "and the government itself go to pieces lest that one be violated?" Congress eventually backed him, retroactively approving his suspension of habeas corpus. But the constitutional debate, executive versus legislative power, was ignited. By 1862, Lincoln expanded the suspension to the entire country. Thousands were arrested. Southern sympathizers, draft resistors, journalists. Military tribunals replaced civilian courts in many cases. One case stood out. Clement Vallandigham, an Ohio congressman and outspoken critic of the war, was arrested by the Union Army and exiled to the Confederacy. No formal charges, no trial, just gone. The legal and moral storm persisted long after the war. In Ex parte Milligan, 1866, the Supreme Court ruled that military tribunals could not replace civilian courts in areas where those courts were still operational. The decision was a rebuke to wartime overreach, but it came after the fact. Lincoln had acted on necessity, not on precedent. Fast forward to 1942. The United States is at war again, this time globally. After Pearl Harbor, fear and paranoia swept the nation. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the internment of over 110,000 Japanese Americans. Though not a formal suspension of habeas corpus, it functioned like one. Citizens were detained without trial, simply due to ancestry. Fred Korematsu challenged the detention, arguing it violated his constitutional rights. The Supreme Court ruled against him in 1944, citing national security. Only decades later was the ruling denounced and Korematsu vindicated. The suspension of liberty, again, had been justified under the banner of public safety. In the late 1960s and early 70s, the Johnson and Nixon administrations expanded surveillance and used federal power to suppress anti-war dissent. While habeas corpus was not officially suspended, its spirit was tested. Detentions, infiltrations, and political prosecutions occurred in a climate where civil liberties were malleable, elastic in times of crisis. Then came September 11, 2001, the deadliest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. President George W. Bush declared a war on terror, and the government created Guantanamo Bay as a legal limbo. Detainees there, mostly foreign nationals, were held indefinitely without trial. The government argued they were enemy combatants, unprotected by traditional constitutional rights. Was this a suspension of habeas corpus? Functionally, yes, but legally, it was murky. In Rasul versus Bush, 2004, the Supreme Court ruled that detainees had the right to challenge their detention. In Boumediene versus Bush, 2008, the court confirmed that habeas corpus extended to Guantanamo detainees, even though they were not on U.S. soil. It was a landmark affirmation of human rights. But it came after years of legal and ethical ambiguity. President Barack Obama attempted to close Guantanamo, calling its existence a stain on our broader record of upholding the rule of law. But political resistance and legal inertia kept it open. The question lingered. In an age of indefinite war, how long could the government keep people imprisoned without charging them? January 6, 2021. The U.S. Capitol is stormed. Democracy is shaken. In the aftermath, some politicians raised questions about whether habeas corpus could be suspended again in cases of domestic insurrection. While no official action was taken, the event reignited discussion about the line between security and civil rights. From Lincoln to Bush, presidents have stretched the limits of executive power during emergencies. Some acted from necessity. Others were later condemned. The suspension clause is a constitutional safety valve, but also a warning. When invoked, it may save the republic, or it may endanger its very soul. Habeas corpus is more than legal jargon. It's a test of a nation's values under fire. It asks, even in peril, do we hold to the rule of law, or do we discard it when it's inconvenient? The United States has walked that tightrope again and again. The suspension clause is not merely a relic, it's a living dilemma, waiting in the wings of the next crisis. And so, the question isn't whether the government can suspend habeas corpus. The Constitution says it can. The real question is, should it? Thanks for watching Footprints of History. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten corners of America's Constitution, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell for future episodes. We uncover the paths that shape the world, one footprint at a time.